Thank you. Thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it. All right, we are moving on to item 5, our investment policy and management plan, revision for the new asset allocation targets and policy. And I talked with Chris a little bit, given our earlier conversation around our, the risk tolerance that we might have some, this is the first reading, I believe, right, Chris,
Right.
of this document? So it's listed as an action item, but we had talked about if members have questions about the reports.
Right. I
How
would
do you want
just
to?
kind of go through some of the pages. I would recommend you keep it as information and we do a final vote in September. If I can turn you, so for example, on INV 128, instead of listing the 4 decision factors, I think I understand pretty clearly, we would merge the wording of decision factor 1 and 3 and list that at 53% and then decision factor 4 at 47. So we'll go that way. And then a lot of the policy change, obviously the decision to be X firearms, all of that will be corrected and maintained. But then on INV 136 and 137, that's where the actual long-term asset allocation goes in, and we'll wait till we bring that back to you. It would be in a similar format where we would have you approve the asset allocation with PCA in one item, and that mostly goes on page 136. 137 would then be the implementation plan of how quickly do we get there. Because year in and year out, you need a policy benchmark to measure our performance, and you also use that in the incentive compensation structure. So we're starting the year without an official policy benchmark, which always makes things tough on the performance measurement people. But I think we'll be able to come back to you with some real clear guidance in September and enact it then. And then the rest of the changes, if you have any questions, they're all pretty clear in terms of, as we said, with the firearms and then correcting the real estate benchmark.
So we anticipate making those changes in our meeting in September, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the first reading. Is there an issue with us? It's listed as an action item, but clearly there's edits to move forward, so, okay, great. Any questions from the board members on item 5? Hearing none, we'll look forward to seeing that back at us in September. Item 6 is the investment business plans for 2013 and 14.
I'm going to go through just a slight quick overview on the slides, and then it's really intended for it to be open for any board member that has a question. The staff will come forward. You'll be much relieved. In the past, we used to have every staff person present, and the entire effort took about 4 hours. But now we have condensed it dramatically. So let me get up and get the controller. Oh, so I'm not going to chart now. Wow, bummer. We're having difficulties in my chart somehow. The point I wanted to make with this is, and the lines did not come out. Wow, it really corrupted it. Somehow it all changed. But the yellow line and the orange line really represent kind of the external market, the challenge of the volatility of the stock market, and then external issues like we just heard, as we've discussed with firearms, the different divestment campaigns. Those really have been on an upswing. We saw them die down for a period, and they tend to be episodic, we think. But it is certainly peaking at a level we had not seen and does not appear to be slowing down based on my conversations with CIOs across the country. They are dealing with many of these same issues that we are. And so it seems just to be a new height in terms of activism and pushing on the pension plan to do things from a social standpoint. The other was the black lines of measurement of internal issues and just how those have increased dramatically with the number of changes we've made to responsibilities, the way we do things. There should have been a purple line on there that fell off the graph, which was the staffing. And the intent was just to show that the staffing and the assets under management have grown steadily, but staffing has been very flat and stable. And so we have, even though we have had a peak in all this activity, we have not ramped up the staffing, and we're starting to feel the pressures and the crack points on that. So the way I describe it is that in essence, in 2008, when the financial market fell apart, we really dropped into what I would call triage mode, which is reactionary. We just reacted to the fires that were in front of us and put them out. We find that we're back in that mode for about the last 9 months. We are really just reacting to news events, and the first thing that we lose is our ability to do long-term strategic planning and to really back away and do things. Stephen, for example, has really had to slow down his innovation portfolio and the ideas. But then the other thing that we see in the staff detailed for me were some examples of where we had the inability to react to what they saw as sort of short-term investment opportunities, near-term ideas, but that we just didn't have the time or capacity to deal with. So it is slowing us down. There are certainly some specific things that have slowed down. Our move of internal management, which you approved, is about 9 months behind where we wanted it to be. Your general consulting contract is likely to be delayed by 6 months. You'll see that coming up in September with a extension on that. But we're hoping we're able to get that posted. It just means we're extending PCA's contract for a period of time. So as my staff points out, it's great to talk about the problems, but what are the solutions? Give me answers to that. When we looked at it, we think, number one, it does come down to people and resources. Staffing has been held constant for 2 years. You're going to see a very large request for staffing resources from us in the 14-15 budget cycle year. The other is I'm looking at reorganizing the branch. We have been a very flat organization with not a lot of structure. But certainly under the new financial system and just the workload, it's demanding more of a traditional kind of a pyramid structure. So, and now that we've potentially added inflation sensitive and absolute return potentially as asset classes, then we want to look at maybe more of a hierarchical structure to be able to get things done and accomplished in the office. And then lastly, resources. As we mentioned earlier, those two new asset classes are a bit more expensive. They are going to require more tools, but we're also seeing in terms of the ability to recruit and retain people because of the difficulties, there's job satisfaction issues. And so that will continue to be an important area that we'll talk to you guys about.
Chris, can you go back to the last slide again? Sorry.
This one?
Yeah, that one. So I'm sure you've covered this before, but why are we having this slow by 9 months and the delay of 6 months? Like what's causing those delays?
It has been a compounding of multiple factors. The staff pointed out to me, you kind of had the collision of the lack of additional staffing. We were required to get rid of all of our students under the state contract. And on top of that, we've obviously, as you're well aware, we've had a big focus on internal controls that was required. We had a big focus on increasing our accounting, and then obviously the new financial system, which has been a learning curve for us. The consultant RFP has definitely been a fact of the shift in the system. The contracts group and our group have had to delay things that we were doing or in order to get the system up and processed. And so we're roughly about that far behind. We have a line that we create to help contracts and procurement. We prioritize the work I do in terms of what everybody requests, and we have a line right now of about 6 RFPs and ASPs long. And so we just have to take turns getting those processed. But we have not issued a new RFP since last fall.
Thanks.
So the key is we want to state it simply. We all would like to focus on what matters most. That's true of everybody in life. We all have distractions. We're not going to get rid of those. I realize that. Things break and have got to be fixed, and that's just life. But what we want to do to focus going forward, and you'll see it in the business plans, is to just make sure we have the right structures to deal with all of these issues, whether it's divestment issues or social issues that pop up and suddenly surprise us, or the financial markets. I think we need to do a better job of prioritizing our work, placing an emphasis on internal, external versus the actual portfolio, and create a mechanism to be better at focusing, taking the time to be strategic. I think we've all said that in our lives, that there's times you need to kind of have the family meeting and get away from the distractions and really plan out better. And we have to discipline to make sure we do that. The business plans, to run through the format for you, we did, as I said, instead of making them about 4 to 5 pages long, we got them down to 2. That was painful for some of the staff, I would tell you. But to kind of go through the focus for you so you understand it, each asset class has its own color. That's been part of our effort to organize things better for you, is to color coordinate everything for the public and for you. Within that, there's a fast facts section that kind of gets at what does this asset class do. But then most importantly, there are the reports. We wanted you to make sure you knew what reports are out available. And I want to give a shout out to Susan Butler and to Communications. They created that little QR scan code so that even out there for the public, we can hand these out. People can scan it on their smartphone and it will take them to our report section. So that way, instead of producing tons of paper, we can get the most current information. It's easy to update, and we're sending people to the same spot. So you're going to see those on our annual reports that we do. We're going to do those even on potentially like the 3D director database, put them on business cards so that people know how to get places quickly for us rather than all of the paperwork.
Oh, your legislative reports too.
All of our legislative reports are going to have those as well.
My only comment about that, Chris, because I actually used it. I love those. I think they're great. You know how much I love all the links and hyperlinks and barcodes. But I just wondered if these documents are going to be documents that the public is reading. I don't know if they know.
Yes.
Is there a reference we could give to like how
These are public documents, and these
right,
are
but
open.
I'm saying, how do they know how to download you have to download an app or something to scan the scan.
Interesting.
So I'm just wondering if, I don't know how that works, or if you can, but I'm sure a lot of our members might just look at that and go, what is this? And I wondered if there was a way to put a little legend or a key saying, I mean, I don't
know
what
either.
particular
I'll
app
find
or
out.
something, but maybe we could just give some guidance so
I
that
don't even know
members
if
who are
they,
reading it
yeah.
can understand how that code has worked, so that it can
Yep.
be a more useful tool for
We're going to usually have the
members.
hyperlinks, which are the blue underlines, so that people know that. But then we'll have those, and we'll make sure, work with communications so that people understand QRs and how to find it. I assume you can do it on an Android phone, but I don't know. So we'll make sure people know how to use them. Every document then has the structure of the asset class. Tom's not here, but that's particularly helpful, and Michael, for your staff, because it is such a big, complex portfolio. I often say there are building blocks even within the asset class, and so it's helpful to understand how an asset class is structured, and some of them are fairly complex. Then we get into the core of the business plan. We modeled this similar to a SWOT analysis, but we really tried to focus in on what does it take for us to succeed? What's the goal, and what does it take for succeed? And then we spent time talking about the risk. What is an impediment to this portfolio's ability to achieve its benchmark? And then also the risk of the asset class. Every asset class has a chart that shows the standard market to kind of give you a rough idea of where we think this asset class is in its life cycle. Is it overvalued, undervalued? Is it climbing to a peak as we think global equity still is? Obviously, that's time period dependent, and it's a rough estimate, but it gives you an idea of whether we think something is over or undervalued. And then lastly, the last section really gets into what are the key objectives. You know, you can look at that next year and say, did we accomplish these or not? So with that, I'd be open to any questions about any of the business plans.
A format question, because it in the year and a half I've been here, with the asset allocation, I always get a little confused when with the basic asset classes like global equity, fixed income, real estate, private equity, those are straightforward. But then it seems like when we have that pie chart, that we show on the website for our members, it has we use the terms like inflation linked or absolute return. But then in our documents, we break it down to like infrastructure or innovation and risk on documents like this. And I don't know, for this member, I know that infrastructure is part of the inflation linked section, but I guess it's a little confusing, some of those areas for me in terms of consistency on how we communicate in our documents about those, because is that an asset class? Well, infrastructure is really part of the inflation.
Right. The organizational structure has not caught up, and it has a lot to do with the lack of increase in staffing, and we haven't reorganized in order, because we knew it would take time to develop the inflation sensitive. It is currently still split. It doesn't have a director position. We couldn't afford one in the budget. So those are part of the things we will change going forward, is adopt a structure that matches the asset allocation. And you will begin to see documents that show the inflation asset class. That said, we're not going to create a director of absolute return and go hire somebody right away and staff it up. I think we've tried to be judicious in our staffing, and that's why that's lagged. You're seeing an inconsistency, but you make a good point, and we'll get it cleaned up.
Absolute return, and then I see using the term the overlay, which I remember being in the audience.
PCA
when
likes
you
the
talked
term
about overlay.
absolute return. We like the term overlay. So we're going to reconcile that
So
with
you guys
PCA,
need to
but
go
you're
and
going to
figure
hear
it
the
out
term
between
overlay.
yourselves and agree on a term. But
Yep.
I think, again, I just always think about it in terms of our members and when they're reading documents, kind of just having that consistency of, and I recognize we're dynamic and I know that these are kind of new areas that we're heading into, and I'm interested in infrastructure. It's just, I don't know, just getting our
That's
heads
helpful.
around it and having it be organized and consistent, I think would be serving to at least this board member and
That was a
hopefully
good
our
point.
members.
Sue Butler is over there taking notes because I moved Sue away from just having to be my assistant. Sue's job is to try and help us be that consistent, to bring in the color coding so that the look and the feel is consistent and the information is consistent. And it's an interesting challenge because most of you read this on the iPad, not in physical paper, and so even that looks and feels different. So we're getting up to speed, but we are not there yet. But I would say it's thanks to very helpful creative staff that we're trying to make those adjustments. So that's good feedback.
Awesome. So are there questions about the individual business plans from any of the board members?
The one thing I would last highlight, INV 162 and 163, we do a 10-year financial plan that's not doo-doo. Hopefully it's accurate. But I know Paul has asked questions in the past, and Michael, you brought up a question about cost. Cost is the one automatic drag we know for sure on an investment portfolio, and so we are very conscious of our costs, and we actually developed this 10-year plan. Obviously, a great deal could change in 10 years, but there are two key drivers for us: assets under management and then complexity. And that's where that question about absolute return and infrastructure would come in. That would increase the complexity. I would tell you that if you look at the charts on 163, we operate at about 2/3 of the cost of, say, other big funds that happen to be across the river near us somehow, and share the first three initials in common. We operate at the same asset size, so not their larger asset size, but when they were this size, we're operating at about 2/3 the staff level and 2/3 the budget cost, and that's been true for STRS throughout our history. So we are really trying to run a frugal organization. But I think my point being that we're hitting the point where the cracks are showing all over the place, and we don't want to lose opportunities and we don't want to lose money. So, but you are adopting this, you are not committing to that. Obviously, every budget is unique and on its own.
Approve the 2013-14 investment business plans.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. All right, let's go on to here. Item 7, fiscal year 2012-13 investment committee objectives. Michelle. This is an information item.
All right, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me or the newer members, I'm Michelle Cunningham. I'm the Deputy Chief Investment Officer. And this next item, item 7, is an information item, and it's really just meant to close the loop on the major investment committee action plan items for last year. And Chris talked a little bit about them already. Basically, of the 2 major investment committee objectives, we just completed most of the asset liability study, and we'll be coming back to you in September. And then the comprehensive review of the global equity portfolio, we started in June, and so we'll be completing that throughout the fall. So, and then the other item, the general consultant selection, we'll be starting that in September. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Any questions from board members? Chris? You have
Just
a
one thing to
question?
add, Michelle and I talked about this, it's an interesting example. Historically, I'm proud to say, for the past 12 years, we've been able to nail 100% of these almost every time. I can only remember one year where we had a couple of continued because they were half and half, but this is sadly the first time, and that's probably another symptom of just the workload is we did not complete many of these on a timely basis, so.
Thanks, Chris. All right, thanks, Michelle.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
For my
Hang on one second.
Yeah,
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
For my benefit on the real estate, what's the new real estate structure? Your 3/4?
We went from, throughout the early part of the 2000s, we had a portfolio that we have 3 subsections to real estate, core, value-added, and opportunistic. We used to be about 50% opportunistic, 50% the other, which we would call core. After 2008, and we had so many losses, the board decided to reduce the risk of the real estate portfolio dramatically, and we went to a new structure that was 50% core, 20% value-add, and 30% opportunistic. The opportunistic investments are fairly sticky, and it's taking a long time to reduce those. And obviously core, we didn't want to just rush out and buy. So it is a process of adjusting that portfolio to the new framework and reducing the risk of real estate.
And these items below the, kind of on the second half of the second page, are really multi-year initiatives, so you'll continue to see those year after year, and we'll update the status of those.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so item 8 is
All right,
with
here I am
Michelle.
again. Okay, now this item 8 is also an information item, and it's also related to meeting some of the investment committee's strategic initiatives. And this one is really involving the integration of the management of the ESG 21 risk factors policy across the portfolio. And so while the ESG risk policy is referenced in the investment policy and management plan, which is really the overarching policy for the investment program, what we've decided to do is actually reference it specifically in each of the asset class policies. And so I worked with the corporate governance team, Brian Rice, one of the senior portfolios there particularly, drafting some standardized language to include in each of the asset class policies. And so that's what you see referenced there. And so we added that in each of the opening sections of the asset class policies for you to review and comment on. See if you, this is the first reading of the policy, and so we can bring that back to you in September if you have any comments. I should mention that the Treasurer's Office did look this over and notice that it wasn't included specifically in the commodities policy, and we talked it over with Stephen and the team and felt like it was covered sufficiently for us because it was in the innovation policy, but we can certainly, you know, if after thinking about it, you would like it included in the commodities policy as well, we can do that.
Can you explain that? I don't.
Sure.
So, what does that? I mean, does our innovation policy over
Yes.
kind of supersede the
It overlays
okay.
the.
Overlays, thank you.
Overused the word overlay. But it overarches the commodity policy, so. Overlaps, better word. So, any questions?
This kind of goes back and echoes Chris's comments earlier. It's, most of the time when we see these policies, they're in isolation, they're not really next to each other, and sometimes, and the fact that we're now reading them on an iPad makes it even more difficult. But I was going through, I noticed that the language that's, say, the introductory paragraph to where we're adding this language, talks about who established the allocation. So like back on global equity policy, it says, the system has established an allocation for global equity. And so each one of the 6 policies that are delineated here have some sort of statement that says that, but they're different. So like this one says that the system established it, fixed income says the board established it, private equity says the board established it, but it's written differently than the previous one. Real estate says the investment committee, but then in parentheses has the board. And then infrastructure and innovation are both the investment committee. It seems like we should try to make some sort of parallel structure within each of those also. So, yeah, and decide, is it the investment committee or is it the board through the investment committee? So.
So maybe standardize that opening section for each of, especially terms like that. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that was the only, in reading them, I mean, they're all focused on what policy it is. So I think that would be the only item within that introductory paragraph that would need to have that type of standardization.
I'm gonna just chime in on a couple things too. Maybe we're channeling the consistency issue, but I know I brought this up to you, Chris, before, and I read some, I've been studying about ESG, and I've been reading some of the, private equity, amazingly, has some journals that are highlighting ESG, which kind of shocked me, which is exciting and encouraging. But when I'm reading some of the kind of the trade communication around ESG, they keep talking about environmental, social, and governance. And I know I just see us going back and forth between governance and geopolitical. And I don't know if it's just, the academic in me that it just bothers me that we keep interchanging the G. So sometimes we talk about governance and sometimes we use geopolitics. And I was looking up what, geopolitics means, and it's different than governance. And so I guess I'm just, and I'm just trying to look at the industry standard and looking at folks in private equity and what they use. Not that we should use that necessarily, but, and I know I'm planning to do some education with some trustees, and I guess I just am trying to, what language do I want to use? I typically think of governance because I know that's something I'm really proud of, the work we do with Anshian here at CalSTRS, and I think the geopolitical is captured in other areas in our policy, and so.
Yeah,
I
the
guess I'm
geopolitical comes out of Appendix A to the 21 risk factors. Because the board at the time, we called those geopolitical. We knew that we already had governance policies, and so we did not want, we thought, to be confusing back then because we'd call it governance and have a governance policy. But I think you're right. The industry consensus is ESG is, the G is governance, even I have a hard time saying it, and we can be consistent. It's hard to be consistent, but I think we can actually go for it.
And then, and I think it's something that we should really be proud of, and so we should be talking about it a lot. And when we do, I just want it to be clear and concise. And then I think just my other comment is I'm really happy of this document because I do think ESG issues sort of do get. I know we have a policy on ESG, but I like having things integrated into kind of the fabric of our investment policy versus an add-on. Even though I think it's great that we have that policy, I like having it more integrated into the fabric of our investment policy. So I'm really glad that we're making these changes and adding it to the different asset classes. Any other questions from board members? All right, so thank you. So is that coming back in September then for final approval? Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. All right. Management of news topics that intersect with investments. Chris, Brian.
Yeah, this was a topic that Sharon requested that we have a good talk on. I know Brian and Ian had some thoughts on it, and it covers a couple of different areas. One is the extent that we look into other people's activities, our money managers' activities beyond investment management, because we've been challenged on that. But the big thing that I need is some rough ideas you would like to see. We'd like to come back in September with some actual steps that we could implement and you could approve. We've had these news events that break so quickly in this day and age and is already over Twitter, and I think it's important for you as board members to share. Some of you get bombarded with members on these questions. Other of you don't hear anything at all, and then obviously elected officials may get through they have an entire system set up to deal with this. But how do we manage these issues? How do we handle them? The investment office, we're frequently doing research very quickly to determine our exposure. Maybe somebody has already extrapolated it and decided, as we saw with the firearms issue, where somebody thinks our exposure is a certain level, it goes out there on the internet, it gets replicated around the world and becomes a fact, and we have to go correct it. But then also, it is a very large, complex portfolio. We know we're going to be exposed to many things, but to the extent of which and where it is, it takes us time. But then there are other times you also, as a board, want to know, okay, well, then what are we going to do about it? And it's in between meetings, so we can have a dialogue. We just want to be able to talk with you about what methods do you want to be informed by us. Wouldn't be so much as press releases, but more keep the board informed and get your ideas on that.
Well, I can speak to it since I'm the one who asked you to bring it up. And I think my intention as an elected board member who does get inundated with input from some of our stakeholders, and rightly so, there's concerns about decisions that we make at times. And, you know, I think my posture is about I mean, we're a big fund. We make a lot of money for a lot of people. And I would just like for our fund to do business with people that have an alignment of interest with our interests. And I know we're not going to be perfect at doing that. And I know retroactively we'll find out, problems that we have. But I think that's how I look at it is doing the most due diligence that we can so that when we align ourselves with investment partners, that those partners, again, share that alignment of interest. I feel like that's become my key phrase these days is, so.
If I can ask, so you mean their personal alignment of interest, that their personal values or views would align with what we think the STRS views are?
I'm sure, Ian, do you want to talk about that, Ian?
If I could ask Alan to come forward, because some of your clients have probably grappled with this too.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you're not talking about personal values.
That was Chris's words, not mine.
From a legal perspective, duty of loyalty, I think it's perfectly okay to look to see whether your managers have aligned interests in terms of your policies. So for example, if you're looking to hire investment managers and they tell you that ESG is hokum and that they're not willing to even consider ESG considerations, I think that's something that Chris and his staff can take into consideration. But if some of these Wall Street tycoon types have different personal values, unless that's interfering with their investment activities, their investment decisions, in a way that's inconsistent with your policies, and I don't know how you prove that, I think you have to be very, very careful. And then, there's also the difficulty of deciding, what is consistent with your policies and which of your policies are legitimate trustee policies, board policies. So for example, we might as well talk about it. Recently, the AFT has led this campaign against certain managers that they allege make personal contributions to organizations that make decisions or take actions contrary to defined benefit plans. It's not really clear that promotion of defined benefit plans is a board issue, a fiduciary issue.
Well, we've
There's a
definitely had
strong-
that dialogue, though, as a board.
There's a
whether it
strong,
is-
there, well, I'll talk about the one instance here. And, I mean, there's a strong argument based on some US Supreme Court decisions that's really a sponsor decision, what the structure of the state retirement systems are going to be. So it's not always true that if a state legislature, governor decides to replace a DB with a DC for, say, new hires, that's necessarily going to cause harm to the existing defined benefit plan. Now, several years ago, I think you're all aware of what happened when former Governor Schwarzenegger had this initiative to replace, in a sense, the CalSTRS defined benefit system with a defined contribution system for new hires. And the actuary was asked to evaluate that, and the problem was that there was no money that had been designated to come into the DB to make up for what the actuaries estimated the DB would lose. So the actuary basically, came in and told you how harmful. Well, that turned it into a fiduciary issue, because then it was harmful to the DB. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. So it's complicated. It's not always easy to determine which issues. I mean, it's cute to say alignment of interests, but I think that's too vague and difficult for the staff to use or apply. So I would advise against asking your staff to do that, and just sort of do it on a case by case basis. And again, try to tie it directly to policies like ESG that the board has spent a lot of time on and has adopted. And then, of course, there's a big difference between engaging these managers and then thinking about divesting managers. It's, the difficulties with private equity, you can't get rid of a private equity manager while the fund is up and running. The most you could do is think about not investing in the next fund. So there's all kinds of complexities. So there's really no easy solution to this issue as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. I'm going to hear from Alan, and then I'll go to Rich, if that's okay with Rich. Alan?
Luckily, I can defer to Mr. Lanoff or to the lawyers in the room on all matters associated with legal, since I have absolutely no standing in that regard. But what I would really encourage is a positive statement, and that we encourage our staff when looking at investment managers to look at issues far and wide without giving them direction on how to act, but telling them that there are legitimate policy concerns that, as part of their overall consideration, they should take into account. And I'm of the opinion that they currently do that. So I don't think you would be changing their mandate in the least. You would just be a little bit more explicit.
Rich? Hang on one second.
I could use a little clarification around this issue. There's a lot of things going on here in this conversation. One is this notion of somehow we should be triaging our investments for what you describe as an alignment of interest, and I'm not quite sure.
Triaging our investment, what do you mean, triaging?
Well, I don't know, that somehow we should have a system where we are in advance reviewing all of our investment portfolio to see whether there is a potential for them, any one investment to, I don't know what the right word is, offend the way we invest. It strikes me that that's an incredibly difficult task. And if not impossible to do before the fact. We tend to find these out when there's a crisis. And so there's a second issue, which I think is maybe more interesting, which is how we manage those issues when they become apparent to us. And I want to sort of put it in the context of the conversation we were having earlier about resources and how much are we discovering, Chris, that it requires an increasing amount of resources to manage these things as they occur, because in our current era of communications, they are coming to our attention way more rapidly, and they tend to spike really quickly. So the first question is that an issue that would lead you to say maybe we ought to have some organizational structure to manage those on an ongoing basis, because we can reasonably expect they're going to be happening with at least the same frequency, if not increasing frequency, both in terms of how we deal with them in the wider world and how we deal with them with the board and getting feedback loops on those things. That's one set of issues, but the other one that you're raising is sort of a different issue, which is is there some process we should be using that somehow can anticipate these and head them off? Or, and the one that comes, no?
That's not what
Okay,
I think of
I'm
due
getting a little
diligence,
confused
like-
here.
Okay, so sorry, I'm not.
So,
very
I am real concerned in this other area, which is how this is happening and our ability to respond, and with the rapidity with which these things happen in the world, we probably ought to be thinking about what our capacity is to react to those in an effective way. Because we have, among other things, we have risk about value, right? Suddenly in the marketplace, if there's, let's use the one that we recently had, if there's a shooting in someplace and we have stocks, does that affect, if nothing else, the value of our investment? Because that's going on, and actually might have been able to unfortunately make the inverse. Suddenly they sold a whole lot of guns. But in any case, are we doing that and reacting in a public way too? So I guess the question is one of our capacity to be doing that, and is it time that we organized in a somewhat, is there a unit that you need, a rapid response unit that because that's the way the market is going, frankly.
If I might, one of the discussions that we've had, certainly I've had briefly with Ian and I've had with Chris, is the increasing engagement of staff in responding to these types of inquiries, these types of stories, and the use of resources. And then on the other side of it, what's the appropriate resource for an individual board member when they're dealing with this? Is it call Chris? Is it call myself? Is it call Ian? Is it call Alan? And so getting directly to the first part of your discussion, my recommendation is that we do have some sort of a process, some sort of an entry point for these type of issues. And then I would suggest that staff should then create some sort of triage and reporting process to get back to the board, because they are coming from various different ways, and legal staff gets involved. We report back to the board, we get involved with Chris. We try to check with Ian on the fiduciary issues, and I'm sure that Chris interacts with Alan. So anyway, that was the reason that I got involved in this, because I do think a process will be valuable.
And then I'll get to Michael, and then I'll grab you, Maggie. Am I correct in saying that, or from even your report and then conversations we've had, that the incidence of these incidents have increased, or at least certainly for this board member, they've increased in the last 6 months, compared to last year. And so I guess I'm just wondering if that's your experience in the investment.
Very much so. Yeah, we would usually have maybe one event a year, maybe every 2 years. But now it seems like, and not just with the speed of the media and the internet, but people are looking to investors. Maybe PERS has experienced this. It's been unprecedented. I hoped it would just peak and die down, but it does not have the appearance. As I said, talking to peers, they're facing this increased issues as well.
I would just weigh in and state that I follow along with Rich's comments. I think it's important that we focus on the primary purpose for which we exist, which is the preservation and growing of the assets for the benefit of for the purpose of paying the benefits of the participants in this plan to the extent that these issues arise. I have been vocal in the past and continue to be vocal about the fact that we cannot ignore the ESG issues that are out there, and we have to be very careful about how we incorporate these issues into our investment policy. On the other hand, I would submit that we do not have a monolithic membership. That in terms of trying to align our investments with the interests of our membership, I'm not sure that we have the capability or should take the time to find out what that is. I think that we should. I like the ESG policy that we have. I think it's correctly focused on impact on value, with the exception of, for example, tobacco, which it was a decision that was made before I came on board, and was a very serious and I understand long and drawn out discussion to come to that conclusion. The issue with respect to guns, I think, was also done correctly, focusing on the organizations or businesses that manufacture and sell guns that are illegal in California. So I like the way it has been done. It has been more reactive than proactive, and I think that that given the diversity of our membership, as a matter of fact, I would hesitate to try to be proactive in this respect. And then when an issue does come up, I think we need a process by which we evaluate and analyze the issues in the context of our duty, as outlined by our council, which is focused on managing these assets for the benefit of paying the participants their benefits under the plan.
The one reaction I had to that, Michael, and sorry, Maggie, is just, I do think, the stakeholder activism and engagement, for them, it is about the value of the fund. And it is about the very thing that we as fiduciaries are supposed to be doing, which is making sure that we make money for teachers' retirement, that we get return and mitigate risk. And so I think that's, I guess, Ian, coming back to you again, I think that's where, and I recognize that stakeholders have a different role than we have, and I get that. I don't think that we have a diverse, it's teachers, it's K through 14 teachers in California. I recognize there's diversity in gender, and, but that demographic is pretty unique to me. And so I don't think it's, so I guess that's the issue I come back to, is I think the stakeholder activism and the things with the LA Times and the concerns about some of the things happening in California directly relate back to the value of the fund and concerns about the value of the fund. So I guess I'm just wondering if you could help me navigate that a little bit more. Do you just kind of feel like, well, that doesn't relate to your role as a fiduciary, and therefore?
Well, some do and some don't.
Okay.
Some issues that certain stakeholders might have an interest in might actually undermine your primary objective, of gaining returns at a reasonable level of risk. And, you have a staff and consultants to help you parse through that and to decide, where a stakeholder demand or even suggestion might create that kind of problem. Then, I've talked about in the fiduciary lectures, we have the everything is equal test available some of the time, so that you can satisfy both, the interests of the system and the interests of the stakeholders. But that's limited because you can only use that, so much. We use it for tobacco, but, I don't know, it's not always available to use. Some investments and, categories and investment managers are unique, and they really can't be replaced with something that's equal. So it's just not, my only, I'm not trying to turn something into something complex that isn't. It is complex. That's why, I've spent my whole career working in this area. If it was easy, then you wouldn't need me, right? Maybe you don't, I don't know. Don't take a vote.
And now from Alan, then I promise, Maggie, you're next.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members, my concern isn't on the specifics, it's on the general. And the reality is pension plans, large statewide pension plans, have become a venue for debating a whole range of issues, some of which directly relate to your jobs and some of them which don't. And you have finite resources, both in terms of your time, and I could think of a number of examples where people came before you where you had no influence over the decision, yet you, because you're polite, listened to people spending a significant amount of time where you could have been doing what I'll call the normal work of the fund. And that is even more so for your staff, because they really make an effort to be responsive. And they do need a framework so that they allocate resources in a prudent manner and not spend a disproportionate percentage of their time answering heartfelt and legitimate questions, but really that have nothing to do with the operations of the institution.
Thanks, Alan. Maggie, Alice, thanks for your patience.
Maggie Ellis, Chair of CTA Retirement Committee. I really appreciate this discussion. It is something that we have had internally, both in small groups as well as large groups. And a number of things came to mind as the discussion unfolded. First of all, big thank you to your staff, because when something does hit the news, you aren't always the first. We sometimes are the first at CTA to get news, and how do we react to it? Well, it's hard to react when we have no idea it's even coming. So our first step is to call Chris and Ed and Jack to find out what are the specifics before we try and respond. So that working relationship is something that we've continued to strengthen over the years and has become more and more important as not only the DB has been under attack politically, but so has public schools and teachers. And so having that close relationship in which we find out information from each other is critical. Part of my job is educating our membership about CalSTRS and the responsibility as a fiduciary, as a board member, and understanding that because we are teachers, we are social activists, we are for our children, our families, that's just part of our nature. And a lot of times that's why we get targeted and then you get targeted, because we have that emotional, personal connection to a lot of people, a lot of lives. At the same time, we recognize that there is a line. You have a responsibility to the retirement of hundreds of thousands of teachers and future teachers. I still got about 15 years to go, so you better be around. There's that line of your fiduciary as well as being social activists. I think your benchmarks that you have with regards to divestments and educating our membership about divestment and when you take your money out of the game, and it's much better to have your money in the game and try and influence, you've proven that. Tobacco was a big discussion many years ago, and it cost us. Firearms was another more recent discussion, not as big as tobacco, but you already took care of it before we even got involved. So you know who we are at a core, and to some respect, you already manage that. You deal with that internally in some of the policies that you've already created. It is never our goal to handcuff you in decisions. And if anything, we try and make sure that our membership understands, no, there's a process. And CalSTRS is extremely responsible in looking at that process. The other part of this discussion, I think, came about because of the attacks on public school, and this is a pension system that really represents public school teachers. And if the attacks on public school teachers continue towards privatization of education, it's going to affect this system. And so I don't know that there is an actual solution, but an awareness, and I appreciate, Alan, your comment about just being aware of who we are, and when we go out and connect with people in the financial investment world, that they understand who we are and what our values are. To connect with someone who aligns themselves with an organization who goes after DBs or rubs elbows with billionaires who are coming into our state to get rid of unions, that's something we have to be aware of. And unfortunately, I can't put it in a little box because that box is got weeds that are going into every business, politics, organization. It's just not clean cut anymore. So the discussion, awareness, transparency, who we are, what our values are, that is what's made you so powerful for 100 years. And you got a lot long term before you. We're not going away. We're going to fight, and we're going to fight for you too. So I just appreciate the conversation and having it in the back of your mind of who it is that you represent so that we can continue to move forward. Thank you.
All right. If it pleases the board, I mean, this is an informational item, really just to have a conversation, which I feel like we've had. I think, we can talk more. It sounds like just even from the board and that it just seems like there's more activity going on. I do think we do a great job of communicating. I think you guys, the investment team, is very accessible to our members and to leaders. And so I guess I'm not asking for a policy necessarily, but I do kind of, part of me hopes it kind of mellows out for you so it doesn't demand so much time, but I'm not sure that's going to be the case. And so I just wonder, maybe it's something that we can talk about more, moving forward, is what policy just sounds so big to me, but are there kind of frameworks that might be helpful for us, or process?
Framework would help in a future discussion, because there's no question education reform is going to be a major issue, and boy, that touches a lot of stuff. We're already seeing it, and I'm going to get the name wrong, those online colleges here in California. I don't remember their names. Sure. There's the two of them. Yeah. Online education, on one hand, it could be an investment. On the other hand, it may be seen by some of our members as a real threat. And so that's an area where we don't know. And education reform is tough. We don't know what's okay and what's not. So we'll need to have that discussion. So we can also, I guess, without a real tough questionnaire, at least tell our partners what the board stands for, so that they're aware. And, we can always emphasize we don't want to see them doing things that are conflicted with us as a client.
The other thing I would add is, and you see this in the corporate governance side, but as part of the discussion tomorrow on the business plans for the organization, we have a number of items related to our sustainability as an organization and how we see that not just an investment portfolio, but throughout the entire lifeblood of the organization. Part of that is, in fact, going deeper into the community and getting stakeholder input, not just from our own member organizations, but the broader. That's part of any business's responsibility, is having a stronger antenna out there in the environment. And that is one of the things on that work plan for our staff. We have, it's not the investment branch, but it's part of our small sustainability unit to do more of. So I think that's going to be getting a stronger structured sensing of what that stakeholder community is, and we will do that in some fashion. So I think that may offer some opportunity to give a definition of what those issues are that people are concerned about, that we touch, rather than just waiting for missives to fly into the building from different places. And, I relate that to the activity that we do at Ceres with corporations. We organize those stakeholder forums so that Fortune 500 companies get that organized input, and it isn't just randomized thinking. So I think going forward, that's a very structured approach for CalSTRS to be doing. So I would look at that.
I don't want to belabor the point, but I would urge you to consider that this isn't really an investment committee matter. I would argue it's really a matter for the full board and how you deal with public relations and how you deal with the broader community. Yeah. And it may well be a much more efficient way of dealing with it than at the investment committee.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Alan, appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. All right, thank you. Item 10 is a review of information requests. Do we have any, Roland?
Madam Vice Chairperson, I don't think we have any additional request information.
Okay. Draft agenda for our September meeting. It's informational. Look at that. Any questions about the agenda? And 11A, opportunities for statements from the public. We'll do one more round. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, great. All right, so we are going to adjourn into closed session, and our closed session will be the kind of the last four items in closed session will be the end of our investment committee for today. So for those of you in the public, you are done for today. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you tomorrow. The Teachers Retirement Board starts at 9:30 tomorrow morning.